We are recording.
Okay, thanks. It is 1 p.m. on July 10th, 2025. This is a meeting of the Land Use Review Board. I am the chair, Janet Hurley. I will ask board members to introduce themselves as I see them on my screen. Brooke.
Brooke Dingeldine, board member present.
Sarah.
Sarah Hod.
And Kirsten.
Kirsten Sultan.
And last but not least, Alex.
Alex Weinhagen, board member. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. So do we have any updates to the agenda from board members? It appears that we do not. Thank you. Do we have any public present? I don't see any.
No one in person, no.
Okay. All right, moving along to consent agenda. Review and approve June 26th and June 30th meeting minutes. I did have a couple of corrections, but let's see what others have. And
how about
whether anyone wants to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll just make a motion that we approve the June 26th and June 30th meeting minutes with revisions to be discussed.
Okay.
Would you consider a friendly amendment to your motion, Alex, to consider them separately so that I may vote on the 26th but not the 30th?
Well, that makes sense. Sure, I would consider that friendly amendment.
Okay, so we will consider the 26th first.
Second.
Okay. I note that the last voting box indicates no vote for Alex. I'm pretty sure Alex was there and voted with, and it was a unanimous decision.
You're talking about the 26th?
Yep, 26th.
Okay.
Are you on page 3, Janet?
Let's see. Yeah. It was the
I
last.
found it.
You got it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Second to last.
Second
voting
to last.
box. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Janet.
And then under E, that the last two sentences, I think, and Pete, maybe you can help with this, but Pete reported that he was working on reviewing current district commission lists to identify existing vacancies and expirations of members' terms and was following up with the governor's office. I don't think the board in general was involved.
That is my recollection too, Janet. It's a good correction.
I agree.
Okay. So
Actually-
I would, yeah, I think that can be one sentence that says Peter Gill reported that he was working on reviewing current district commission lists to identify existing vacancies and expirations of members' terms and following up with the governor's office.
Captured.
Regarding pending appointments, sorry, because there are some pending appointments, and I presume that Pete reaches out to those of us who are in particular parts of the state that may have, options that might be considered for vacancies. And if not, Pete, I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and likewise, I think I don't know that I've been as proactive reaching out, but I've certainly made an announcement. If commissioners, staff, board members have recommendations, certainly let me know. But we could certainly be more. I can certainly be more proactive in terms of reaching out to folks on the board for your suggestions in your kind of geographic areas as well.
And we can talk about that later rather than under this consent agenda, but just wanted to put a pin there. And then under H, I'm not, did we, I, how much, well, is this the one that Kirsten sent?
Yes.
Yeah,
Under H, I emailed some
yeah.
more expansive content and clarification of the discussion that had occurred.
And how did you develop that? From memory, or did you go back and have
did-
AI transcript it? Or
I didn't have AI
Transcribe it.
I watched part of the YouTube video.
okay,
So it wasn't derived from AI and it was just my own kind of synopsis.
and I haven't
it's-
had time to review it,
Yeah,
so I'm
it's-
not sure that. I wonder if we want to put this off, if people want to review what Kirsten put together there. It just seems a little inordinately long compared to how we describe other conversations. And because it was a very preliminary draft and a very preliminary conversation, I'm not sure how important it is to flesh it out that much. Does anybody else have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. This is Alex. I had flagged item H on the minutes as well as being too AI condensed, and not having any real substance in it. And I did read Kirsten's suggested expansion of that, and I thought it nailed it. I thought Kirsten did a
Okay.
good job capturing, what the crux of the discussion was, actually without going into too much depth, but still kind of captured it. I would much prefer Kirsten's, paragraph or two than the AI's one sentence.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm sure my couple paragraphs can be improved. The one thing in particular on the draft that I felt was not reflective of the conversation is where the draft notes indicate that the board considered the difference between rules,
Right.
guidelines and procedures. I feel we didn't do that.
Right.
Like we discussed that we
asked
would like
for-
to do that.
Yeah,
We haven't taken
asked
that
for
up yet.
clarification on those. Yeah, I mean, I flagged it too because I didn't think it accurately represented what the thrust of our conversation was. So, but as I said, I haven't read Kirsten's yet. So
So let's
is
get
it
time.
okay to put this one off?
Sure.
So we had a motion and a second on the June 26th minutes. Maybe we can either withdraw it or vote it down.
I can withdraw
I'm
the
not-
second.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm happy to withdraw the
Okay.
original motion, so we can start over.
Okay, you want to make a motion, Alex, for the June 30th?
Sure. One last thing on June
sure.
26th, under item E, which you had flagged the last two sentences, Janet, operations budget, legislative
Yeah.
updates. I had flagged the first two sentences
Okay,
because the way that AI captured that, I think it was related to Pete's legislative update. And it just read awkward to me. So I was just gonna say, if we're going to take some more time, maybe I will volunteer to listen to that one more time and maybe propose a slight rewrite. Maybe the AI
Okay.
got it perfect, but it seemed a little
Okay.
off.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, I'll make a motion to approve the June 30th minutes pursuant to revisions we might discuss.
okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Brooke. The only thing I had for the June 30th was under H. Said Alex Weinhagen shared his analysis and preferences, as though nobody else did and there was no other discussion. And I'm pretty sure I did. And it may be that Kirsten shared a little bit, but asked for deferrals till she had more time to think about it. But that was my recollection.
I agree.
Yeah, my note on this one, Janet, was that plus it might be nice to have a couple of the items that actually fell out of my mouth because I had a list and I was working off the list. Doesn't need to be in there. I wonder if there's a way that we could tell the AI to if we identify one section, like say, do a little more, and it would
Yeah.
just automatically generate a paragraph more or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Huh. You want to experiment with that and put this one off too?
Sure. I don't think there's any reason that we need to get these tidied up on a particular time horizon. And we are sort of getting used to the AI helping us.
Yeah. How about you take that and
Sure.
play around with it, Alex? Okay.
I haven't had a chance to play with the AI at all yet. So this would be an interesting
Oh, okay.
opportunity
Yeah.
to try it. Yeah.
And then, so do you want to withdraw your motion?
Sure. I will withdraw the motion to approve the June 30th minutes and just encourage anyone who has other changes though to mention them now so we can get them together for next time.
Great.
I didn't have any
thanks.
other changes. on the
Yeah,
June
I'm also
30th.
not writing down all of these like substantive changes. So if you, like Kirsten did, have edits that you want to discuss at the meeting, I think the best practice is to put them in an email and then we can continue to discuss them in here and then I can just copy and paste once they're approved.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
also,
that's a
I
good-
had a question about the procedure of withdrawing a motion. Does that require a vote of any kind? Or
No.
would that just be what I would put in the discussion section?
I think somebody can withdraw their motion without a vote on it. Yes.
That's my
Okay.
understanding too. So you in the minutes, Maddie, you would just indicate that I made a
Alex
motion, it
withdrew.
was seconded, and then I withdrew it after,
Yeah.
some discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did think that in this June 30th, that item E, where Rachel was presenting us with budget numbers, that there's no detail there, right? And we talked a fair amount of detail. The minutes don't need to reflect that, but they could a little bit, like the overall number maybe or something. So maybe I'll play with that one too. And
Okay.
see if the AI will automatically generate, a paragraph instead of a sentence.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
Sure.
Okay. And I still, okay. I do see at least one public participant now, and we could go back and ask for public comments on any non-agenda items. And hearing none, let's move on to E, operations, budget, and legal updates.
I have one operations update, which I've been tasked with giving, but Pete and Allison, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to start with.
No, I actually thought we had changed the agenda, but maybe it's for next week to remove the
Yeah,
legal
next week.
updates from this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, you yield the floor to you, and I'm happy to chime in on that item as we get there.
Oh yeah, please do. I'll do my best, but luckily I have some backup here on
Yeah.
on the content piece. We as a staff have been looking at the open meeting law. So this is dovetailing perfectly off of your minutes discussion just a minute ago. And our legal team has taken a look at the existing open meeting law and changes that occurred in the last legislative session as it relates to our district commission pre-hearings and hearings that are held on Act 250 permit applications. There was a gap identified that we may need to produce minutes for those district commission pre-hearings and hearings. I should say produce both agendas and minutes for those meetings, similar to how this board is operating. We have been seeking some input from the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration on best practices related to maintaining that information for the appropriate time and in the appropriate formats. As well as we have a staff, what I'll call a staff working group, pulled together on a couple meetings to identify what is necessary, identify new processes that may need to be completed, new templates and the like. So Pete or Allison, I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to cover. We just wanted to bring that to the board's attention so you're aware of this operational change.
Yeah, it's gonna take, I'll just add, it's gonna take a little bit of time to roll out and make sure that the proper once the materials are developed, et cetera, to work on the implementation and get that out there to folks so that they understand kind of what is needed. Again, we've been operating under a different assumption in terms of the commission process. And this just puts a fine point on ensuring that we've got those minutes and agenda within that particular context. But I'll just flag, this is not an argument or an area that we really explored or touched base with the legislature. So just to kind of put in the back of the board's mind how they may want to look at this legislatively going forward too.
And also just Vasara's involvement has to do partially with how much it costs to store recordings, audio-visual recordings versus written minutes. And over time, Rachel has suggested that the costs of maintaining the audiovisual recordings from these hybrid meetings is going to really add up. And so it's part of the consideration here. Kirsten.
So is the agenda and minutes detail, is that something that we now understand took effect when the initial open meeting law change occurred and would therefore have been in effect starting in January, and we have to retroactively produce minutes from prior meetings? Or is it part of the the new changes to open meeting law that took effect this July, which I thought were site visits, just going from memory? So I'm just kind of, do we have to go back and develop minutes and agendas for prior meetings, or is this new stuff effective this month?
I think that's a question that
let
our
Allison take it. Yeah.
legal team might be able to weigh in
Happy to
on.
back up if you want.
I don't know that I want to be fielding legal advice questions, or you want me to be fielding them in the open meeting, but it's not a new requirement.
Mm. Okay, thanks. It's definitely added complexity, right? Like it's more detail
More
and
work.
tasks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Does the commission have to review and approve draft minutes then, presumably in the same manner that the board does? So that's another follow-up action that they'll have to take. Yeah. Okay,
Alex.
thank you.
I think, Kirsten, you're
sorry.
identifying a lot of things that we discussed on our staff working group meeting. All those topics came up as things that we'll need to work through. Yeah.
Alex.
Interesting that we're figuring this out now. I think it seems like we should be able to figure this out relatively expediently. I don't see this as being a difficult thing to make happen. At the same time, I think it's important to point out that the open meeting law indicates that none of the open meeting law extends to the deliberations of a public body in connection with a quasi judicial proceeding, right? So you guys are all aware of that. I just wanted to put that out there on the record, since we're talking about changing our protocol to meet these requirements, that we don't need to change any protocols with regard to how the district commissions conduct their deliberations. but you're talking about their formal public hearings where they're accepting evidence and taking testimony before they begin deliberations.
Right.
That's correct.
Gotcha. It's just interesting, isn't it? That, there's legal notice requirements for these hearings that we've been following to make sure that people know about them and the like. Publishing an agenda doesn't add anything to that, even though it's potentially required under the open meeting law.
And that is actually an interesting point too, Alex, that we've been talking with Visara about. Their counsel has been to use your existing process as much as possible to create something like a notice and agenda, like change our notice, the language of our notice, to expand it to meet this additional need, even if it's just broad categories associated with that notice language. So I think we're trying to reduce the amount of change as much as possible so that it's easier to implement statewide.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. I like that approach. I do see the benefit of having minutes, though, even if they're very short, the absolute minimum of the minutes that the statute requires for the district commission meetings with the help of AI or whatever. That way folks don't have to wait until the district commission issues a decision, potentially months down the road, to have some record of what happened at a district commission meeting in terms of who was there and that sort of what was discussed.
The
video
recording will be, available for, is it till 30 days past the end of the the close of the hearing? So, but yeah.
Yeah. Who wants to look at recordings? Blah. It's much easier to get a one page.
Yeah.
This happened and this is the topic that was discussed. Who actually showed up, that sort of thing. Interesting wrinkle.
I think you're
Pete,
not
what were you
alone.
saying?
Oh, go ahead.
No, you covered it there, Janet.
Oh, Allison.
I just was gonna say, I think, Alex, you're not alone in wondering, in questioning whether, different open meeting law requirements are, like, how much value those may or may not be adding onto the existing sort of notice and other, like, meeting or hearing recording requirements that we're following. And so I think that's part of the reason Pete was flagging for potential future legislative changes and looking at whether seeing whether the legislature might want to make a change on requiring our contested case hearings to be subject to these same requirements. There are other entities like the Cannabis Control Board, for example, that they follow these requirements they do have contested case type things happening at open meetings. So they follow the same open meeting law requirements for those and have minutes on their regular board meeting agendas. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, and then there's obviously the PUC example where they have quasi judicial proceedings as well, and those are exempt from the open meeting requirement.
The PUC has a complete exemption. It's not that it's just that they don't have to produce minutes. And it's not because they're quasi judicial, it's because they're the PUC. So, any other operations, budget, legal things? No? Okay. Okay, so F, discussion on carry forward appropriation.
I'll kick this off and preface this by saying that I covered some of this information at our June 30th meeting, but I know Sarah wasn't present for that meeting, so I'll just recap what carry forward is and how much of it we're contemplating. At the end of the fiscal year, which for the state closes, June 30th and reopens the new fiscal year on July 1. If you're ending the year with unexpended appropriation in a general fund category, you can create a carry forward plan and submit that plan to the Agency of Administration for their review and approval. They may choose to approve that plan, approve it with conditions, or revert the funding back to the general fund for other purposes entirely. But we have ended this fiscal year with 2 different funds with unexpended general fund appropriations that could be ripe for carry forward. I'm sorry, I will say 3 funds, 3 separate funds that are ripe for carry forward. The first is a one-time appropriation that we received years ago for our scanning project. And at a minimum, my recommendation would be to create a carry forward plan so we can carry forward that money for the purposes of the scanning project moving forward. So that's the first fund. The second is related to a one-time appropriation that we received to pay for our new board members' salaries and benefits. That was originally budgeted for you all to start on January 1 of this year, but as you all know, you started on the 28th, so there are a few additional pay periods that we did not end up paying because nobody was in those positions were vacant for a few pay periods. In that fund, there's just over $74,000 in that fund in unexpended general fund. The last general fund category is from our base budget appropriation. And as you know, our funding mechanisms are funded through special fund revenue related to our Act 250 permit fees, predominantly, and then an appropriation from the general fund. That general fund related to our base budget, we did not expend all of our appropriation last year, and there's just over $42,000 sitting in that fund at the end of this year. So really, we're talking about $113,000 that we can create a carry forward plan for, or I'm sorry, $117,000 that we can create a carry forward plan and submit that to the Agency of Administration. That plan needs to be submitted by August 1st of this year. And it will take a month or 2 for them to get back to us with their final decision. So the funds aren't immediately available for us to spend. Any questions about that? Before we dive deeper.
Yes, Rachel, the carry forward for the scanning project we're considering separately. Does that need the same approval, or is that already sort of pre-approved? Okay.
It will need to go through the same process.
Okay,
Although it will need to go through the same process, yeah.
got it.
And
Kirsten.
it has done that previously, right? Yeah, as
That's
we're
correct,
trying to
yeah.
draw down the ARPA funds during that time, right?
Yeah.
Kirsten.
So just a quick question. Thanks for sending the memo, Rachel, and from the administration about this opportunity to submit a proposed project for use of those funds. And I'm just trying to get my head around, does the opportunity require that the project funds usage occur in the current fiscal year? So it's like a 12-month window that started July 1 for the
Yes,
project. Like it's
I
on a
think that
multi-year project.
I think that they would appreciate that that is how those funds are used, yes. It would be a stronger proposal. How's that?
Okay. To not have it be a multi-year project.
And so in addition to the memo, Rachel, I think you sent a list.
I did not send a list. I
Options?
thought,
Oh,
Yeah, I
Pete
circulated
did.
a,
Oh, Pete
circulated
did,
a list, a
sorry.
potential list, but yeah.
okay. And have board members had a chance to review that list?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, and do any board members have any thoughts to share on that list?
Yes, I have thoughts. I'm just trying to bring it up on my computer. Sorry.
Okay,
Hold on. I guess my initial thought was that the idea of Tier 3 and Criterion 8C GIS mapping work is something that we are doing, and it makes sense to me to potentially use those funds to help cover that if we didn't anticipate that spending. The problem is I don't know what that spending is. When we talk about consultant services, I think in this case, the services that I'm driving through the Tier 3 mapping work are through ADS. Just for that and how much that's coming up to. So I don't really know. I don't really know whether this is A, appropriate, or B, of any magnitude to warrant, a carry forward request. So Rachel, I don't know if you have any greater indication of how much ADS is billing us.
generally they bill us around $90 an hour for GIS support. So I think it then goes down to the volume of support that you're looking for in generating these maps to generate discussion in your stakeholder groups and elsewhere. That's not something that we built into the base budget in fiscal year 26, the fiscal year we're in right now. Because that is money that would be expended, like I think the mapping analysis that you're looking at kind of lines up with the right time period for this one-time use of GIS mapping. It could be a useful outlet for some of that money. Whether you want to use ADS as the mapping outfit or, potentially go out to bid, for a third-party contractor to come in to do that work for you. I think there are options around who could help in that vein, but it does seem like there's work to be done in that area. And we didn't fully budget for it in this fiscal year. So I see that as a gap.
Okay, that's helpful. I wish I could be more helpful with telling everyone, like, over the last 4 weeks, this is how many hours ADS has provided for Tier 3 mapping, because it's been substantial, but I just don't know what those hours are. So, I'm happy to do
Eventually,
some.
yeah, eventually I will know those hours. ADS does they have a billing arrangement, so we get their timesheets and we understand who is working on what. But I don't think that I would get it in time for
yeah.
Right.
August 1st, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's something that we could certainly ask ADS to provide to us to understand,
Or maybe
Yeah.
an estimate get an estimate from them in terms of hours. And I would say, just in terms of hiring a contractor, that I don't think we should use the carryover for that. There's too much, involved in sending out an RFP and then reviewing what you get, and then it's not efficient, and I don't think that you would find anybody as cheap as $90 per hour. So,
For
No,
sure.
definitely not. No.
For sure. And the experience that I've been having working with ADS, their GIS mapping professionals, has been really positive. It's taken longer than I would have liked, but it's been positive, and the sort of synergy that they bring because they do work for ANR, you just can't replace that. So I
Right.
wouldn't want to go outside of state government for that work either at this point. And I'm happy to reach out to Eric Engstrom, who's literally pinging me right now on Teams about the various layers we're trying to finalize. To just maybe ask him, like, could you summarize, how many hours you've spent, on the tier 3 work to date, and that might help us if we wanted to do carry forward on this. My other feedback on Pete's suggestions is, I think I'm always a supporter of training, and so if there is like a one-time training that we could do with carry forward money, I would be very supportive of that. And it was a high, it was a priority that Pete indicated in his work. So I just don't know what that would be exactly. So maybe Pete could talk about that some more when we get to that. But I was chatting with Allison today about the vehicles for enforcement officers item, and I know we've never had them, but boy, it seems like we should. It seems awkward to have our 2 enforcement officers driving around the state in their personal vehicles, when that's a big part of their job, and having to do mileage reimbursement or rent a car, or it just seems awkward. And so I don't know if this money really is appropriate for that kind of capital and purchase, because it feels one time, but it's not really, because it's going to roll into the future in terms of maintenance and the like. But I do like that idea of getting our enforcement officers out of rented or personal vehicles and getting them a state vehicle that gets them to where they need to go and is not identifiable as their own personal vehicle when they're dealing with some very difficult situations and some unhappy people.
In terms of that one, Alex, I wondered if we could get a lease from Buildings and General Services for a year as sort of a pilot, test project for us, with this, with some carryover. I looked over the information that BGS has, and it's really, the costs are opaque. It's dependent on too many things to even understand what the costs might be. And I don't know if, Rachel, you have any idea of what perhaps DEC or another A&R agency might pay BGS for a leased vehicle on an annual basis for similar kinds of use. But it's sort of hard to gauge. And I know that Michaela and Chris are both here and may want to speak to that one. And I don't know if we want to hear from other board members first and then come back to this, or whether we want to keep talking about this. What do you think, Brooke and Kirsten, who've had your hands up for a while?
Well, I just don't have any sense at all, like how many days a week, how many site visit trips are, in a month. Does it make sense? Is there a need to begin with? Or, and then a comparison of what would it cost to have vehicles versus, and not that I want to burden any of our employees, but, if this is once every other week, that's one thing. If it's, 4 days a week traveling, all over the state, of course, as well. Recognizing that, but without more information about it, I just don't feel like it's something we can make any decisions on. But I'd be happy to, consider that, because I want our employees to be supported and not be personally burdened.
And did you have your hand up about other matters too, Brooke?
Yeah, but if you want to finish with this one thing, I was going to talk about other suggestions that were made.
Okay. Kirsten, do you have anything on leasing, or do you want to?
As far as the vehicle detail, I think some analysis, I presume that's already maybe has occurred as part of this idea, but I also would note that there are other employees in the organization who do undertake travel for site visits and lots of various things. So I just would hope that we would look at this holistically as well. So some, some kind of analysis of
Yeah.
what
And
makes
I
sense.
think
And I like the
Michaela
idea of a
has-
pilot study like that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good way to start.
Yeah,
But
and I
this-
think Michaela has some information that she could share with us. Michaela, are you there?
I am here.
Do you want to share screen and show the two?
Yeah, I have
Uh,
two images.
Yeah.
So, and then an example of what I submitted with an expense form to show the different scenarios that had to be worked out before landing on the right choice. So let's see.
While she's pulling that up, I'll note too that Maddie was trying to, Maddie's doing some follow-up work on trying to pin down various cost options, because as Janet said, there's just a range depending on various inputs and how many miles you're using the car per year, et cetera. So she's waiting on some follow-up from follow-up questions that she's posed.
I want to add that I'm having some strange technical difficulties with my laptop. And so Allison, if you can show those two maps and the highlighted part of that email, then I can talk about it. Apologies. These are new issues I've never had before on this laptop.
There are a lot of
Yeah, well, I
tech
can't open
issues
it.
this week.
Yeah, I can't get into Y-Drive right now either, so.
Second. Is this showing up?
Yeah,
Yes, it
actually,
is.
why don't you go to the one below? I think that would be probably the most helpful. So, I,
Allison,
I'm
can you
working.
put it
Like
on
a slideshow?
the slideshow? Yeah.
So this is coming out of something I did a couple years ago about some expense reports, but on this map, I'm showing where the enterprise and fleet pickup options are. And I live below the bottom of that red teardrop. And I looked at the last 2 years of my site visits, and 75% of those site visits are south. And I'm showing here, so in order to pick up a fleet or rental car, because Chris and I try to minimize the use of our personal vehicles. So we tend to put together these marathon days, and Jenny will attest to that because I would not let her return home for a while on a couple of days recently. So she was right along while I did all the other site visits past the one we did together. So with 75% of my site visits south of where I live, I'm driving north and northeast to pick up a vehicle. And I kind of figured, well, how many minutes, how many miles is that adding onto my day? That's in a different direction than where I'm actually doing the site works, the site visits. And I also, Allison, could you just show that email? And sorry, this is a disjointed, I only learned about this very exciting possibility a couple hours ago. So I scrambled to pull together some helpful information. Yeah, it was the one I just sent you. Okay, so if we can zoom in on that. So here's just an example of, I had to go, the farthest south I went was Manchester, and I also had visits in South Royalton, Killington, Rutland Town, and Mount Tabor. So I really loaded the day because I was going so far south. And in order to figure out using the cost calculator that we're required to use, I factored, if you could scroll up a little bit, Allison, so people can see that.
Scroll
I
down.
looked at,
Oh.
yeah, so had to compare, well, if I went to Waterbury, how long would it take to get there? How many miles? Because I would claim that on my personal vehicle. And then I compared the Enterprise pickup, which is Waterbury. Oh, sorry, the Enterprise pickup, which is in Berlin, and the Fleet pickup, which is in Waterbury. Although if you can read the numbers, it costs less to use the Enterprise car. So, quote, I should have used that option, but here I talked about how many more miles it was to pay me on my personal vehicle and how much time it would take. So I did I'm doing this all the time, comparing, what if I go to Waterbury? What if I go to Berlin? And then I put down, if I went directly south on my car, it would have been saved, in this case, an hour and a half of driving and almost 90 miles. So it's just an example of the kind of things that Chris and I go through when we're doing our expense forms of doing a big analysis about where are we going to get a vehicle and what is it going to cost the state and what is it going to cost us and how many minutes and how many miles, because I had to have justification for picking up Fleet here because it cost more than going to Berlin, which was farther. It's just an example. And you probably know that enforcement officers at ANR and all the wardens have their own vehicles.
Do you have anything to add?
Do I have
Yeah.
anything to add?
I think it was for
Oh,
Chris. Her
Chris.
voice cut out. Yeah.
Michaela put it so eloquently. I dare say whatever I add might pale in comparison. I do say I have the pest exterminator at my door as we speak, but I'll be as brief as I can. Yeah, having a dedicated vehicle would be such an asset for reasons Michael has stated, and also the extra time, and I'm not exaggerating, the extra time it takes to make a comparison between, can we use a fleet vehicle? Do we need to use a rental vehicle? Is it more feasible or more cost effective to use our personal vehicle? That could take upwards of 40 minutes to put together.
Every
And
time.
that's a time sink where we could be doing other things of value. So
Yeah,
I guess that's
not to
all I'll say.
mention- Not to mention that you drive further out of your way just to pick it up.
Yes, that's very
And
true.
can you, either of you, give us an idea of how often you go out on site visits?
Well, honestly, I'll preface what I'm about to say by I factored a couple years ago, I did a cost analysis and I figured that what it was costing me to use my personal vehicle was, on the order of almost $800 a year out of pocket, to go pick up things, subtracting stuff. So that was significant. And so therefore, I try to minimize. I try to jump on and carpool with other people, but I try plan these marathon days where, they're 12-hour days. I would go much more often if I had a vehicle. I mean, I try not to go because it's costing me money. I try to do as much as I can by contacting the ANR enforcement officers and, seeing if I can do a lot by looking at aerial imagery over time, with the time lapse. And so, yeah.
Which I presume you would still do, but yeah.
Yeah, but
What is it
Chris-
roughly
Yes.
now? Like roughly how many days a year do you and Chris go out on site visits currently? Even within that parameter of you make.
And if we don't have
you-
that, maybe we can follow
On,
that
on,
up.
Yeah, just roughly.
on average, for me, once every 2 weeks, sometimes once a week. But
Every
as
1 to
Michael
2
has-
weeks.
Yeah, as Michael has said, if given the possibility that we have dedicated vehicles, it would be more, because we would be able to, without having to do that analysis, without having to plan, as Michael has said, the marathon trips, we'd be able to go to all 4 corners of the state plus the center more often and have our presence known more often.
Could the vehicles reside in Montpelier such that they would be available for other staff potentially? Like, would that be part of the proposal? Like where would,
If we're
where would the
gonna-
vehicle be parked?
If we're gonna locate somewhere, I would choose Waterbury because again, looking at where the site visits were, 75% of them south of my house. And so if I'm to get to Montpelier is an hour out of my way. So round trip, that's 2 hours out of my way to go to a site visit to where I am most of the time. And so, yeah, that costs money
So we
too.
would find a dedicated parking spot somewhere at the Waterbury complex as part of the
Or they
plan
would
to.
stay with Michaela and Chris.
Yeah, Kirsten, that was my sense, is that if we did this, especially as a pilot, it would be to provide them with vehicles, the two of them, as two staff that have statewide responsibilities and are on the road, could be on the road a lot. But when I was in municipal government, our zoning administrator was out on the road a lot. And it was really beneficial, for them to understand what's going on.
So we'd have two vehicles?
That was what I was
Like
thinking,
it's-
one for each
Oh.
of them, yep. In the same way that, Fish and Wildlife wardens all have a truck and the trucks go home with them and they use them for business travel and that sort of thing.
I was just gonna add, just as you're kind of thinking of use value here, the enforcement team has been really good with coordinating with the district coordinators as well. So, and that's a real benefit when you can have a name and a face of a district coordinator there to be able to help and encourage and demystify the permitting responsibilities and requirements for people when they're going through these site visits and whatnot. That can be very beneficial. So long way of saying there will be, I would anticipate that there would be a continued use of that kind of dual purpose that way. So a little bit more benefit to being able to have some flexibility with the vehicle situation.
I mean, if I could add, based on my experience at the Agency of Natural Resources, every small program has a couple of vehicles that are available to everybody that they have on several campuses, depending on where they're needed. And so that's how they handle that, to have vehicles available, just as an example.
Yeah, Brooke.
So I guess I'm wondering what is being asked for, because I mean, Alex is sort of assuming one thing. I was sort of assuming what Michael was talking about. Like, I mean, I'm not hearing a need for, an everyday kind of thing. So if we have two enforcement officers, could they share a vehicle? Or is it something that could be available to other people? So I think that we do need some information about, what's the realistic, if you had this option, how often would you use it, and could the two enforcement officers share? And is that physically logistical and that kind of stuff?
Nicola, can I ask, A&R, you said parks sort of shared vehicles here and there. Are there any of those that are close to Huntington?
No. No,
What-
none of them are.
So is
Yeah, or to
Waterbury?
Highgate. Yeah, Chris and I are,
Yeah,
we live.
We're not exactly
in-
next door neighbors.
Right, and you're in Highgate, Chris?
That's correct, yeah.
I think we're
So-
almost an hour, we're an hour and a half apart.
Right, and so, but I'm trying to think of other places, other state facilities that they could be parked at that are, convenient to each of you. And when other staffers in the program need a vehicle, they, maybe there's some way that we can do scheduling that gives you two first priority, but it's available to others. Sarah.
So just doing a little bit of probing with BGS, it looks like there are forms to be filled out in terms of justifying that might help us answer some of these questions. And so what I'd like is, I don't think we're going to get the definitive answers that we need now, to have our staff, maybe Rachel could take this and fill out some of those forms and see, I'm not sure, we might have to make a justification in order to get to the point where we can do a cost analysis and just get some numbers as to what this would cost. There are different lease options, it looks like, that we could use through different fleet vehicles with specific assignments. I'm not sure the terms of them, if it could just be for the year or not. But I would also like to say that I walked into the meeting thinking, oh, it would be great to try and use some of the surplus for some of the scanning project, but hearing from Rachel that the multi-year projects are the ones that are not necessarily top priorities to fund, I do support looking more into this. I think there are some other things that we haven't yet discussed that were on the list, such as some additional training and also a temporary technician that I think are also great ideas that I'd like to discuss if we're at a point where we could.
Yeah, and I'm not sure Rachel's the right one to give this to. I think maybe Michaela or Chris, if you're
Maddie's
interested
working on
in,
it too, actually, with,
and Maddie,
yeah,
that's right, yeah.
we're working through it, yeah.
Maybe just let that team try to find some more, you know, data in terms of costs for us. But yeah, so I do want to talk to, I would also like to talk about a temporary tech. And maybe Rachel, do you have an idea of costs for that?
Yeah, thank you for a good discussion, lots of good ideas, there are always going to be more ideas than funding to fund it all. So I appreciate the brainstorming session here. I think that what I'd like to share with this group, not being able to divulge more information, but we have some planned absences that are going to happen in the technician group this coming fiscal year. And last year was a particular year where we had 2 different positions turnover with several months of downtime. That was challenging to overcome. And definitely was added workload, slower processing times, and reasonably so, because we operated without, one person on that team for maybe 5 months of all of last year. And we're looking at potentially leaves of absence that would tally to more than that in this coming fiscal year, just for different personal reasons for folks on that team. So I'd like to propose having somebody come in as a temporary worker to kind of fill the gaps. And there are limitations to a temporary staff appointmentship. They can only work a certain amount of hours out of the entire year. It caps out at 1,280 hours for the entire year. So if they were here for the full year, that sort of works out to be just around 3 days a week. But if it was a shorter duration and we understood where those leaves of absence were, then they could go up to 4 or 5 days a week, potentially. I think all told, that would come in around $50,000 as a one-time cost, but this is a distinct need, and I just want to put a fine point on that. I think it can be challenging to overcome like long leaves of absence, and I think this will help fill that gap.
Brooke?
Do it. My vote is yes. By all means, we need to support our district commission offices. Yeah, please, that sounds like a dire need. We have to show our program and our personnel that we understand these things come up and we've got to fill the gap, not to create a hole to have to dig out of later.
Alex?
Sorry, Janet, you're a little garbled from time to time on the audio. That's
Oh,
why I didn't
sorry.
catch it. Yeah, I'm totally supportive too. Like Brooke, I think Rachel makes a good case. My only question, Rachel, is that likely to be competitive? Because it seems like this is an every year issue for every department across every form of state government, that people take leaves, people have issues. And so do you think we'll get, we think we'll get approved if we ask for 50,000 for this?
I think there's a good chance for it, yeah. I
Okay.
think this is a pretty common way to use carry forward in other
Oh.
state agencies, so certainly that's, you know, the counsel that our HR representatives have given to us.
Great. Well, in that case, yeah, I'd actually put it right at the top of the list of my priorities for this carry forward. Then I didn't realize this was a normal use of these funds. I like the forward thinking of like, we know this is happening, and we have surplus funds, let's account for it.
And this would be a little bit less than half of the carry forward amount. So, Kirsten?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I would wholeheartedly support the use of that for this purpose as well. And I'm interpreting, like, it wouldn't be on the list if someone within the program had bandwidth to fill in this void. So I'm interpreting that's the case, and that this is important and needed, and I wholeheartedly support, you know, staffing the regional offices. So that's a great one. And the mapping work too. I mean, if we're talking about this sort of more globally, the expenditure needed for, you know, mapping work to me is also like important and necessary. So sounds good.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
No, I think that the staff is a priority piece. I think that some of the training too would be a great use of some of these one-time funds. If we could also talk about training, but staff is definitely a priority.
Can I ask, so we did get money from the legislature for digital work. And it seems like that could be used for the GIS gaps that weren't specifically budgeted for. Is that not the case, Rachel?
I think that you can read that language in two different ways, so maybe I'll let better legal minds than myself prevail. It's, you know, how you read a and in sentence, but I think maybe I'll let somebody else read that.
Okay.
Read that section of the appropriation and weigh in.
Okay. Brooke?
Yeah, I just wanted to say before we left kind of the personnel issue, there was another recommendation or suggestion for a board assistant. And while I don't feel that, I think we've all become pretty self-sufficient to the extent possible. And I don't want it to appear that we want to hire somebody else to assist the top heavy part of the organization. On the other hand, I do want to also be cognizant of the additional jobs that have fallen on our staff. And so if there is, you know, if we've overburdened with, you know, me needing administrative help on the appeals study, or, you know, that all of those new things, what Maddie has to do now, that is something that I want to be cognizant of. So I would like our leadership team to speak up on that if they feel like that's a need for our employees to be able to help us accomplish all the work.
So I think we're not ready to endorse a particular plan at this point. We want to get a little bit more information. I think it's clear that there's support definitely for the temporary tech And I wonder if we get more information about leasing from BGS, whether we can understand how much that would cost and whether we could do both and then have some left over for something else even. So can we come back to this in a week or less? I can't remember if we had it on a future agenda. I can check, but
It's not,
it's not.
but it can be added, but it's not
Okay.
currently.
Okay. Let's let the legal team, enforcement team look into that aspect a little bit more. And I don't know if you want to firm up the estimate for a tech, Rachel. Do you need, or is it just going to be 50,000 and that's that'll do it? Or
That's- I mean, I can give you more details about how I arrived at that number, but yeah, it's,
okay, that's pretty much the number. Okay, great. So maybe we can come back to this on Monday. Is that enough time, or do you think we should come back to it next Thursday?
Rachel, did you say what's our timeline on
We
having
have to, August 1st
August
is
1st?
is this deadline for submitting the plan.
I think it would be helpful to have a direction next week. Like I'm hoping by the 17th that we could have a direction. So we can write this up, have it be well worded and submit it within the right time frame.
Sarah?
Submission day is August 1st. But yeah, I
It'd be
think
Thursday next week I don't know how long it'll take for BGS to respond or ask follow-up questions, but if we have the space, that might give us a little more time to pin it down.
Just a point of clarification and a question. So with the lighting study and training, I'm guessing that's external dark sky and not necessarily energy savings. And there was a cost, for how much training would entail. But the other component that it seemed like if you're going to do the first piece is then creating standards. It would be great to have a rough ballpark, because I think if we were going to possibly do one, we would probably want to do the other in tandem and put it together as a project. And I think that given that we have some uncertainties about how much things will cost, what we're going to be able to do, that's just an area that I'd love to have a little bit more detail so we can hopefully use some of this to the best possible ends, some of this excess funds to the best possible ends. And that was just an area that is like, I think we know what half the cost is roughly, but not the other half. And if we could also get that for next week, I'd appreciate it.
Kirsten?
I just asked, and this is maybe a question for Rachel. Let's just say conceptually that we sort of package together these various things, the tech, the vehicle or vehicles, training, the money for mapping. If we have this handful of projects as a package, is there any downside to that? Or, I mean, do you think that the administration contact who reviews these is, or can it be this handful of things from your maybe experience or perspective, or anyone who may have been involved in this previously?
Are other people hearing like a breakup of the audio? Because I don't know if it's mine.
I
Okay.
thought it was just me and I tried
Yeah.
turning off my video, but it didn't help. So, Rachel, you were just talking, but you were muted.
yeah. I think I heard your question, Kirsten, whether having multiple line items to spend this money on is less or more beneficial than one big line item, right? Or one or two big line items. I think, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'll just go back to I'm not sure that I think they're looking for good government, one-time appropriation, one-time initiatives that are gonna further you along that year. And that there could be good reason or cost savings in the future that might be derived from the spending. This is language that's coming directly from the memo that came out from finance and management on this topic area. I think my only recommendation is that it should be written succinctly and to the point, and that it's clear and concise on whatever we decide. And I don't know that we really need to give a detailed cost analysis breakdown within this carry forward plan, but to be able to know that everything that we're proposing is going to fit within that total is a key piece. Does that make sense? Pete?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, to Sarah's point, I think consideration of funding that would be, to frame it broadly enough so that we can utilize that funding related to training and development of reclamation standards or lighting or sound standard, that type of thing. Making sure that we've got it broadly worded enough so that we can incorporate both the training aspects of it as well as the kind of development aspects of it, because it is in tandem. You don't just do one without the other. You've got to have both, and sometimes one starts and then the next, and then you go back to training again or whatever it might be. So it would be good to have that worded broadly, but with specifics towards action items that we want to achieve.
Alex?
So I don't want to throw too many wet blankets, but I don't feel like I know enough about this lighting standard and expert training in relation to our program to know whether I would want to prioritize that for this carry forward request. Similar with sound standards or gravel pit reclamation standards and the like. So I'm guessing, Pete, that these are things that the leadership team has identified as needing some work based on how our program has been functioning over the last however many years. I just don't know enough about them to be excited about making them part of a carry forward request at this time. And it seems like we only have a couple weeks to pull this together. So I respect your point, Sarah, about maybe we could get more details on that. But part of me wants to say, if we need more details on like what it would be to write a rule or a standard on lighting, then we can't do that in 2 weeks and make it part of this carry forward request. I think we got to take birds in hand only.
So, no, that's a fair point there, Alex. But I think also what part of this is training and understanding of what those standards might be and what that might entail can help then us develop those standards and requirements and conditions under those. And I think you're right that these are issues and areas that leadership team, but also staff have brought up on multiple occasions saying, hey, these are areas that we're probably not serving the public to the greatest extent that we can because we're not as clear and straightforward about our process or requirements as we could be. And having some expert advice come in to help us on the front end could be very helpful for development. And then maybe on the back end for training, et cetera, rollout of those types of things. But we can, this was certainly a quick brainstorm in terms of different ideas. We can get you guys some more information and try to hone in on what might make most sense and what would be kind of the top priorities within those that realm. For instance, on the training piece, we have, wellness training for staff as one item. That's a pretty discrete, straightforward item. Some of the other ones, as you're mentioning, they have a lot of different aspects and tentacles to them, and we can try to kind of pull those in a little bit more and prioritize for you all to consider and think about.
Okay, so we're gonna come back to this next week, and I would think that if board members have additional thoughts and can share that with leadership team in the interim. But in the interim, if the enforcement team can work up some, best guesses at estimates for leasing 1 or 2 vehicles for enforcement primarily, but perhaps to be available to others in the program. And it sounds like, Rachel, you've already done the analysis for the other. So I think we can move on to the next item on our agenda, unless anyone has anything else on this topic. Okay. Item G, studies and reports. I'll start. We are very close. Tomorrow, I've asked for feedback on the draft regional plan guidelines to come to me by tomorrow. We are already incorporating or considering comments that we've already received. Rebecca is, on top of how those, whether or not fitting in those comments changes the statutory sorts of relationships. And so mostly I think it's going to be me, Sarah, and Rebecca that look at these comments and respond to them with a revised draft. And we hope to get that revised draft to the board for adoption before the end of the month. So, and hopefully the board members have had an opportunity to at least look at the guidelines as they were sent out last week. So, and then we met this morning with staff about our sort of timeline of deliverables for this. We expect to be receiving applications starting in September, the pre-applications. And so by January, we may be ready to take in a final application for which we will need to make a determination of compliance. And all the while that's happening, we have a lot of other things going on too. And we're going to keep getting these pre-applications. So there's a lot going to be coming at us. Just let's try to keep it all under wraps by communicating with each other in terms of our timelines and whatnot. Sarah, do you want to say anything about Tier 1A?
Sure, and I'll just say to that point too, is the master schedule has some timelines in it that we were looking at yesterday, or I think it was actually today, with regard to the regional plans. And I just encourage everybody to make sure that you're as up to date as possible, because I pulled back in that master schedule some of the Tier 1 timelines, because we're on a collision course with a lot of things going to in saturating our staff capacity all at the same time. So just trying to figure out things around the margins. I did get a couple of after the fact comments that on Tier 1A that were submitted well past June 20th that I'm looking to incorporate. And again, I'll be getting that comments back out, and would like to bring that to the board, realizing that regional planning guidelines have to come first. And so perhaps that will be August, but I'm putting a pause until we see how it goes and can get moving forward on the RPC guidance. So thanks.
Alex, what you got for us?
steady as we go with the new delayed time horizon. The next stakeholder meeting for tier 3 is next week on July 15th, and the anticipated delivery date of the first draft of tier 3 rules to all of you is 2 days after that, on July 17th, so that we can begin talking about it at our July 21st meeting. That's the tier 3 update. Except to also say that Rebecca and I met on Tuesday of this week to talk about that first draft, and she's already got her talons into it, and will be giving me some feedback next week to help inform the draft that you all see subsequently. And so just many thanks to Rebecca for working with me on that. And on Criterion 8C, I've been telling you that we're going to have that group together a little past July 1st. Well, guess what? It's past July 1st. So most of the invites have gone out, and I'm just hearing back from people about their availability to serve. And my intention is to hopefully sometime next week prepare a list and give it to all of you so that we can have some discussion about whether the working group for Criterion 8C looks good to you, and whether we need to change it or supplement it.
Kirsten, I know you were talking about meeting with staff about implementation of the wood product manufacturing report recommendations. And we are going to have on our agenda tier 2. And do you have any updates on what you're up to? No.
Nope, not at
Okay.
this time.
Okay. Brooke?
On the appeals study, we just posted the agenda for next week's focused stakeholder meeting, number 5, for July 16th. It's going to be online only to look at just the Act 250 model, if the board were to take Act 250 appeals only, to go over some key issues to flesh out, such as the appeals jurisdiction. Are we talking only about JOs and permitting? I think we've heard guidance from the board that enforcement actions are, we seem to be satisfied with them at the court, feel like the process there is probably appropriate. So, and then of course, in terms of appeals of JOs or permitting, we want to talk about what kind of standard of review to discuss with the stakeholders, that the board certainly feels like we believe we have the capacity, given the new requirements under open meeting law, to be able to do an on-the-record appeal. The question is that a standard we want to move to? And if so, do we want to use some sort of hybrid? Here's the record, but you can submit other materials for good reasons, etc. And then to talk about the board structure, I think with the smaller docket and limited number of appeals in Act 250, I'm not sure that we really have any need for hearing officers or, splitting into rocket docket panels or anything of that nature. But we do need to talk about the firewall to assure people that the appellate board would not be involved in any kind of influence or day-to-day operational control over the actual decision-making of our coordinators or commissions. But that is in statute, and but to make sure that there is expressed in the proposed board model, board rules for the model, that is adequately planned for, and since it was specifically discussed in the actual charge for the legislation. And then to bring up any other ideas that we had not yet talked about. So I actually, I've scheduled the meeting for an hour and a half to make sure that if we have, to get going and make sure that we do have a full hour at least to talk. And I have reserved 10 minutes at the end for public comment. So the schedule for the meeting is 1 o'clock to 2:30 is the scheduled end of that meeting. And Kirsten is the board member on call to go to that one. And then on the 22nd, I have worked with Maddie to create an agenda for the board meeting, which is going to be the stakeholders being invited to discuss municipal appeals. And so I scheduled that for 2 hours, but if I haven't sent out any agendas or anything, and I circulated that just for comments about, do folks think it's adequate time? If there are others being invited from the public, do we want to extend the public comment period? So we can just do a little administrative agenda setting response to that, so that we know that when we have the 22nd meeting, you know, all the folks that the board would like to hear from are invited. But I do want to be careful about making sure that, you know, this is a stakeholder group that's very invested and has spent a lot of time and is sort of at a moment here of now fleshing out the ideas. And I don't want them to feel like that we're disregarding them in any way. So my proposal is kind of to separate the meeting if we wanted, you know, a number of folks from the public from the municipal arena. If we segmented that and just extended public comment for however long it might be needed. And then we have 2 other meetings. The 23rd I was thinking about, but with that board meeting on the 22nd, I think that's more than enough for the stakeholders to be asked to attend that week. But then we have 2 other dates, the 29th and the 30th. They are shorter. They're going to be the 1.5 hour stakeholder meetings. The 29th is going to be devoted to the permit specialist, environmental justice advocate, ombuds office. We still haven't really selected a name because that will be driven by what the ideas are for what the role of this office could be. And I'm really looking forward to that because we have made sure that some key players to that are definitely available to engage in that particular conversation. And then the next day, the 30th, is I have a bookmark in the calendar, and I thought perhaps we should do like a cleanup, any other issues that folks wanted to discuss, or we may devote it to talking more about the court or improvements to the current court model. But I thought we would wait to see how these first 2 meetings go on Act 250 and municipal appeals before we decide on that final of these drill down shorter meetings.
I sort of feel like we do need to devote some time to the court model. And if you feel like the previous stakeholder meetings have covered that to a sufficient degree, Brooke, then I guess I would defer to you. But do you feel like the previous stakeholder meetings covered it?
You know, I think so. You know, the one great idea that's come out of it is to require the statement of questions to be filed with the notice of appeal. And that's Jim Dumont's great idea. Beyond that, I think that it's been sort of well, I'm not sure what else we can do. And, you know, Alex, you've been wonderful about, you know, suggesting that maybe the legislature and the judiciary get together, or, you know, to try to figure those things out. I think that we have exhausted people's ideas. Now, that has nothing to do with people wanting to express their preference for the court versus a board model of any sort. And that, I think, is still important we've been holding back, you know, the gates on that, trying to say, look, we're trying to create something that the board can look at that is fully fleshed out, that is a viable option to consider. And so ultimately, we're trying to create those choices, the best choices that we can put together. And then the board ultimately, in the end, will have to decide on a recommendation of, do we pull Act 250? Do we do other appeals, et cetera? So people have been very patient on that front. they've been engaging in these board model, build a board model sessions we've been having, but I know that they will want to address either the stakeholder group, or even probably more attractive would be to have another board meeting, stakeholder meeting, to let folks in sort of in the end, when we get these things formulated and the board then is going to be considering decision making on them. I feel pretty strongly that these folks would like to be heard at the end, you know, to say what their ultimate positions or arguments might be for staying with the board or going to one or more of the board models.
Sarah?
I apologize, I missed the meeting on the 30th when this was discussed, and I guess going into that, I was with the under the auspices that this would be the first of several board meetings that we'd be discussing it. It's not necessarily on the board agenda for today to discuss, but I think that it would, I would like to share my thoughts on it too. And taking a look at what's provided under state statute in Act 1A1 of what we have to get back to, there are 4 different areas. And I think what we've been with the stakeholder group very focused on the board model, and there's some other specifically, I think it's number 2 that talks about housing and prioritization of housing appeals. I don't know if these additional stakeholders are going to get us more information on some of those, but I just would hope that we are per the Act 1A1 requirements, where we have to provide responses to the 4 different areas, that we have adequate information on it. And I would like to hear some additional discussion about the E-Court model. I think that fits into the 4th bucket of the all others with the permitting process.
And Sarah, this studies and reports item on our agenda, I think gives us room for you to express your thoughts that you might have now. We still have 15 minutes almost on this, so if you want to continue, you can.
Sure. I did want to take up the time. I see that others have their hand raised, so I'll just be very quick. So there are the 4 areas in Act 1A1. The first part is about whether or not to allow consolidations of appeals at the board or environmental court. I think just very briefly, appeals can be consolidated at the E-Court currently, and this is infrequent. Why? Would there be greater consolidation if all parties did not need to consent? I believe that there's a required consent to be able to consolidate. Do consolidated appeals offer any expedition or other benefits? While there has been discussion in the stakeholder group about moving all appeals, Act 250 and our municipal to the board, there has been a little discussion about consolidation within the environmental division, and that should also be included in the report. The second area about how to prioritize and expedite the adjudication of appeals related to housing projects. Most of the discussion thus far of the stakeholder group has been around analyzing past practices, not looking ahead. I'm going to read.
Can you slow down so that maybe we can take these one at a time, because I'm never going to remember all the different things that you're kind of throwing out here.
Written, so I'll share them afterwards, but I want to be cautious of having the comments received within the public portion of the meeting before I share them out. I will slow down. So on that, most of the discussion thus far of the stakeholder group has been around analyzing past practices and not necessarily looking ahead. The new Tier 1 designations provide an opportunity to expedite the housing process, and appeals could be explored further. It was noted in the stakeholder process that municipalities could streamline their local permitting process in Tier 1A or Tier 1 areas. There could be specific recommendations around this, such as requiring administrative permits as opposed to municipal board permits for housing projects in Tier 1 areas. With robust local regulations required for Tier 1s, The zoning administrator in a tier 1 community could issue a zoning permit for housing projects that can meet the standard and expedite the process. While appeals to the local DRBs would still be feasible, appeals of ZA decisions to DRBs are usually limited to whether or not the ZA erred in issuing the permit. And it would be an up or down vote. And similarly, if it got subsequently appealed, that would be a fairly quick up or down vote to the E-court, which could then hopefully expedite specifically housing projects. Standing could also be limited for housing projects, and housing projects could be reviewed on the record, or an administrative law judge could be used for those specific cases. For the third area, the procedural rules to govern the board's administration of Act 250 and the adjudication of appeals of Act 250 decision. This section also calls for procedures to eliminate conflicts of interest so the board were to manage appeals and issue permit decisions. The board has existing procedural rules that are in need of updating to address present needs. There has not been discussion about what rules could be created to effectively address conflicts of interest, particularly with a lack of staffing redundancy. There's also a perception of conflicts. There's also the perception of conflicts of interest that may be as detrimental as actual conflicts of interest for the board. Concerned about perceived inequities that may arise for those seeking to appeal jurisdictional opinions to the LURB, particularly if there's an expedited process or limited standing. Consideration of procedural rules to firewall the LURB should also be considered further, being environmental justice and what services could be offered to appellants to ensure an equitable environment for appellants wishing to bring concerns with Act 250 decisions or procedures to the board outside the appeals process. And then just lastly, under the other actions, there's capacity for the report to address a wide array of ideas brought up by the stakeholders in this section. These include having Act 250 major applications heard on the record, having the A&R secretary hear appeals of A&R permits, and improve rules for the LURB to operate under. I would also offer the idea of utilizing an administrative law judge to expedite appeals of interested person status. Whether or not someone has the right to appeal can take as long to adjudicate as appealing a permit decision. Additional staffing for the E-court, decreasing the need for jurisdictional opinions through additional guidance and other concepts to amend the criteria of Act 250 should be considered. Data analysis of appeals, such as a 5-year look back and review, could be conducted to shed lights on the types of appeals and time to resolve. There's also a perceived negative image of the Act 250 process, whereas developers seek to avoid triggering Act 250 altogether due to the possibility of appeal, which could be addressed through education, outreach, and data. So sorry, that's
okay. If you could, now you can share that with all of us written, and we can consider it and, tee it up for discussion at the next time we discuss the appeals. Alex.
Right. I was just going to echo the court model improvements. And Brooke, I know you're already aware of this, but I just wanted to say it so it's in our meeting, that the idea of providing the court with more resources was one that might be something that we include in the report if the legislature were to opt to remain in the court appellate model. More resources. By more resources, I mean another judge and maybe another law clerk. And I guess I had one substantive question for you, Brooke, on the court model side of the coin. The idea for the administrative hearing officers and such, was there discussion in the stakeholder groups about a way to amend the court model to also use those in conjunction with the Superior Court judges? Or does that whole concept really just live in the board model side of the equation?
The board model side of the equation.
Okay.
I mean, part of the problem here is there's some real limitations, and that's why we're listening to the lawyers about what can and can't be done to the board, to the court model. The other thing is, in terms of saying they need another judge or another law clerk, first of all, each judge has a law clerk, which is highly unusual in the judiciary. Most of the civil and criminal and probate judges have to share clerks. So they already are staffed in that regard. Now, In terms of having another judge, I have heard Judge Walsh testify that if you want us to do more volume than we're doing as fast as we're doing it, another judge would be helpful. But I don't know how this board would have any data upon which to even analyze that and make a recommendation based on anything other than, well, we heard Judge Walsh say, one time, if you want faster things, maybe you could give us another judge. I don't know what that means. And I don't want to be presumptuous to go really outside the scope of the, what we have the authority and background experience, knowledge as a collective board to, I don't want to invade, a different arm of government. And, what the legislature can tell the judiciary to do, well, they have suggested target dates for, simple, complex, and in between categorization of cases. And they try to strive for those. But I know that a lot of the conversation has been legislature can't tell the judiciary, there are limitations on what they can do. And, what you're talking about are court systems that are pretty, here's the thing. The reason why the lawyers want to stay in, a lot of the lawyers, and I would feel similarly before I have looked at all of these issues from many different perspectives and understood the arguments about moving to a board. And that is, it's all predictable. It's all regular. You have rules. Everything happens the same way. And even though timing may not be predictable, there are very long-standing rules of civil procedure. For the environmental division, they have a few sections that don't necessarily apply. But, given the amount of time that we have and what I think is the appropriate scope of what we should be talking about, I think it goes way beyond either the scope or our expertise to do much other than listen to the experts who have represented people on both sides in the environmental division. And I will certainly reach out to the judiciary. We can ask Judge Zone if they would like to make any comments or give us guidance on making suggestions about the judiciary and what might help from a resource standpoint. But I really don't want to be presumptuous in terms of where we go with this report and what we are suggesting. I think it needs to be limited to what's appropriate for us to make suggestions about.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Kirsten, let's hear from Kirsten before we move on to the next item.
So, like Sarah, I kind of outlined some thoughts and I'll try to run through them quickly and happy to forward them as well. So, I just wanted to say the administrative law judge hearing officer detail, I'm feeling unsure about that. I was appreciating Alex's remark about this seems like maybe an added step. On the other hand, I do think that there could very well be things like specific things defined for that role to complete that would perhaps probably provide some efficiencies in the process. So I was drawn to that. And along those lines, and I probably gave a bad example of like, oh, the zoning setback, that's not, but I think there's some other things, like maybe it's the participant decision detail that would lend itself to an ALJ. And so along those lines, I do remain interested in better understanding kind of the scope and breadth of, and particularly the municipal appeals. Like what are sort of the main elements and volume, and how would that, how could that be broken apart and assigned to, what part, who's doing what in terms of the process? I tend to think of this all on kind of a systems basis, and I'm trying to better understand the information and the data around it. I definitely agree about the enforcement cases, that there needs to be a judge who would say, yes, this is the penalty. I mean, I think a lot of front end work happens at least on the Act 250 side, calculating a proposed penalty, et cetera, using the system that we have in place. But at the end of the day, you need someone to recognize that. And that wouldn't be us. In terms of on the record, I think many towns are not equipped to do on the record, but I think that we would be in terms of the Act 250 program. I think district commission decisions can be done on the record. In the past, I've been reluctant because I've worried about the chilling effect of having cameras and equipment in the room beyond what's been previously needed. But now that they're here with the new open meeting law provisions, like, yeah, we those decisions can be put on the record. I like the idea of an appeal starting with that lower level record and then having the ability to add to it. That conceptually makes sense to me. You gather up all the information below, go through it. Okay, what other information is needed as part of an appeal? I like the ability to consolidate and coordinate local and Act 250 appeals if that can somehow be retained. So, I do think about, well, if the board were to have jurisdiction over Act 250 decision appeals and then the municipal appeals remain with the court, that would sort of complicate that, right? You'd lose that possibility, I think, to have the coordinated or consolidated appeals of local and Act 250. So that's significant. One concern that I have about the court model currently is the scope of, at least on the Act 250 side, the scope of decisions that are settled. And so in my mind, often don't yield, precedent that can directly inform implementation of the statute and rules. So to me, we have a lot of cases that settle. And I think that's just something to consider. I don't think, in terms of who can appeal an Act 250 permit decision, I don't think that should be based on whether or not a person or entity participated at the municipal level. For a couple of reasons. Sometimes the municipal decision occurs after the Act 250 permit decision, and sometimes it's just not even in play. And it's separate jurisdictions. So I just don't see how that would should govern whether or not someone can bring an appeal of an Act 250 permit decision. Conceptually, I think if the Act 250 decision or appeals went to a board model and not municipal appeals under a board model option, I don't think you would conceptually need to have 5 full-time members due to the pretty small number of Act 250 decision appeals. I just kind of like looking ahead. I just don't think that you would need to have that scope of board. And I also will just kind of put it out there that I think that's a bit of an elephant in the room with respect to, us as a board conceptually, potentially recommending a board model for any or part of the appeals. I mean, we're talking about giving it to ourselves. So I think that it's very important that we just consider this on, a system and data-driven basis and look at the current scope of the board's work, look at a timeline for what responsibilities we have. And then once we've come up with a recommendation for what we recommend occur with the appeals, then we can sort of layer that on top of those other existing responsibilities. And I think, be revisiting not just board staffing, but the board itself, what is needed for a board. I guess in terms of the court option, like I agree, I think that needs to be looked at further. In terms of finding efficiencies, I really give a lot of weight to what the practitioners say. Like, I'm not an attorney. I've been a client, I've been a witness, I've supported litigation, I've had all these different, roles at times in relation to litigation, but I'm not an attorney. And so I think we need to listen very carefully to what all of those practitioners have to say. I don't know about Rule 5 Jim Dumont made that suggestion. It sounds good to me conceptually, but I don't really know myself if condensing the time frame, allocated to defining these core questions of litigation, like that to me seems a very critical foundational component of litigation. And so I'm interested to know more from the practitioners if that's a good idea. It sounds like it's a good idea. So that's, again, I'm paying close attention to what the practitioners say. And I also think, housing appeals, definitely interested to explore that further. And I haven't really, I think there's still a lot of discussion and thought that needs to go into compiling all this information. And I don't think it's been mentioned in this meeting yet, but Brooke had put together a draft possible outline of a report. And Brooke, sorry, I haven't really had a chance to look at that, but maybe we could do that as another meeting. Just kind of go through, roughed out sections of a report. So thank you for doing all that. And thank you so much for all of the hard work and organization. I feel like it's been robust and there's a lot of information and it's really, really important and helpful. So thank you, Brooke.
Oh, thanks.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Thanks, everybody. So
And,
I'd like to,
Janet, can I just have 2 seconds just while we're still on the topic? I know we're running late, but I just wanted to mention in terms of this coordination and consolidation issue, okay, that was, it really is not that big an issue. It is something that if we have one-stop shopping, okay, that was the ideal because then you have the opportunity to coordinate your cases. Consolidation requires a more formal thing. Coordination can happen without everybody agreeing. What it does is it just gives you one hearing, hopefully, and then all the decisions to the different permitting processes can be made at that moment. But it happens so infrequently because the applicants don't do it for various reasons. They get zoning way before they get an Act 250 decision, or they want zoning before they get an Act 250 decision. So truly, it is not a big issue. The only real question is if A&R is still in the court or, if it's split up, well, 2 or 3 cases a year get consolidated. So it doesn't seem to be a big issue. In terms of housing appeals, that's going to be talked about as we're talking about the board models to try to figure out, of course, we want to prioritize them and they get in the line first, which you can't do at the court. So I hear all of these and we're going to try to work it all in and weave that tapestry with all of those issues. So great information. Thank you, everybody.
So I'd like to propose that we take a little break because we've been going for an hour and a half and I do need to use the restroom. So can we do that? 10-minute break and reconvene at well, let's take a 7-minute break and reconvene at 3 o'clock, please. Okay, it's 3:00. Thank you, Maddie. I just wanted to wrap up our appeals discussion that we were just having. I allowed that Kirsten and Sarah in particular could voice their thoughts on the matters, since Kirsten mostly deferred last time and Sarah wasn't here. So thank you for that. And sorry, my agenda isn't up. And I guess I can ask if there's any public comment at this point. Though it looks like maybe, do we have any public? Yeah, Annette is here. So on any items that we've discussed thus far, Annette?
Thank you. I don't have any comment at this time.
Okay, great,
Appreciate it.
thanks. Okay, so next item on the agenda, discussion and possible action on board representation and appeals. Brooke had wanted to bring this up, and so Brooke, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Let me share my screen. I've prepared a motion for discussion, so I'll put that on the screen. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
So I wanted to make a motion pursuant to the board's authority under Title 10, Section 8504, which governs appeals to the Environmental Division. And so that relates to extra decisions of our district commission or our district coordinators. And that section states that it starts out about A&R, the secretary of A&R, being able to represent A&R in all appeals. And then the chair of the Land Use Review Board may represent the board in any appeal under this section, unless the board directs otherwise. And then if more than one state agency is entering into the, if more than one state agency other than the board either appeals or seeks to intervene, only the AG, the Attorney General, represents the interests of those agencies. But in the normal course, if there is not another state agency, the statute gives the authority to the chair to represent the board. And so I would like to move that the board directs otherwise according to the statute. With regard to this important decision-making power, in order to reflect the intent of the legislature's composition of the board, which requires diversity of expertise in geographic region, to wit, that the board direct that the full board, not the chair, represent itself before the Environmental Division, such that all litigation decisions will be voted on by the full board, while still empowering the chair to sign any necessary documents, such as stipulations or settlement agreements, after review and approval or ratification by the full board. And I think that this is this is generally how we have been operating, but I think it's important to reset the default in order to adequately attain the board's expertise and the diversity of those viewpoints, so that we have a more informed and collaborative decision. I would point out that elsewhere in the statute, besides reappointing like a district commissioner if they're recused, and then reassigning like from a different commission to fulfill that vacancy, that kind of thing. It appears that all the other powers relating to litigation, like our enforcement powers, we have to vote as a board on whether to issue a notice of alleged violation letter to a potential respondent, or to enter into and assurance of discontinuance or to issue an administrative order, as well as just civil citations. So those seem pretty or fairly insignificant compared with the ultimate decision-making power once we become a party to litigation on appeal. So I think it's important that we reflect the intent of the legislature and use all of our expertise to bear on the decision-making of the board.
I'll second the motion.
I would like to postpone this, not having seen this and not having vetted it. This is, I mean, if it is, as you say, how we have been operating, then I see no need to make this motion. And if it's different, I would like to better understand what exactly we are changing. I think that the representation paragraph here, L of 8504, it gives us gives us the option of choosing another board member other than the chair to represent on appeal. And I think that that is, I think the idea is that instead of having 5 people have to respond under, the various court deadlines and whatnot, to have to call together the entire board in the middle of various legal procedures with the court. I'm not ready to vote on this. And I would like it to be vetted by our legal team, and I would like more time to think about it.
Let me just mention that I can understand the issue of having to call a board together if we were a select board that meets once a month. You know, in my 30 years of practice, I knew if I was going to be negotiating a settlement agreement with a town, that whoever I was negotiating with was going to have to go to the next scheduled board meeting and get a ratification if we had agreed on some settlement agreement. And so you plan for that. But in our situation, we meet twice a week. There's no time critical nature of any decision that could not be made by a fully employed board that worked full time at this, to meet twice a week anyway, and could certainly schedule an emergency or a special board meeting very, very quickly, and we're all around and a quorum could be attained. So I appreciate that concern, but I don't think it's applicable in this context.
I disagree.
Well,
think-
we had a recent example of that where, there was some time critical nature and a month went by and we had, 7 meetings in the interim where we could have been consulted about the language of a settlement agreement, which then was agreed to without us ratifying. And I would not have voted for all of the language that was contained therein. And I think that not being allowed to be part of that process was not what was intended for example, our Act 250 permit. I mean, our Act 250 expert on the board, Kirsten, was not involved in reviewing. I, as somebody with all the legal experience, did not have that opportunity. So I think this is very important.
Nonetheless, I think it is very important, and I think it needs to be vetted before we vote on it. Sarah?
So a couple of things. I'm not prepared to vote on something without adequate time to review and digest. And I was quickly trying to go to, we've been provided the draft list of authority decisions, and we have so many rules and guidance that govern the body. I'm not sure that a motion by itself is the appropriate way to go about this. And it might be actually amending one of our rules, such as our procedural rules. So I would also like to have some time to review this and to have our legal team review it to make sure that we're not running afoul of other rules that might be governing this. But just curiosity, and I'd like to hear more from Brooke and give her an opportunity to sort of tell us a little bit more, because and she used the model of when she was working with the select board, and that whatever the select board decided would then have to go to a vote. But what you're talking about with that process, just taking a step back, is that when you go into negotiations, it's usually not with the whole board. The whole board is not there and negotiating at the table. Usually there's a delegate of a board, but I don't know, maybe there's some other parameters or some other models that we should be aware of. I just wanted to give Brooke an opportunity to sort of advise and provide where she thinks that this process could be improved.
Now, what I was referring to is, typically in litigation, when a town is involved as a party, they have town manager, they have the zoning administrator, they have the board chair, the select board chair. They typically have one person that is the representative at court, whether they have a lawyer or not. And so if a negotiation happens where a settlement agreement is, wordsmithed, and okay, that person says this is, the basic parameters, I think this is what the board would agree to. They take that back to the board and they have the board look at it and ratify it. That's in the normal course. That's been the regular procedure in most municipalities when I've dealt with them, either on representing them or representing a different party with, negotiating with the municipality. So my point is just that this is the most important decision that is made by this board. We have a history of entering into settlement agreements on the overwhelming majority of cases that get appealed. And I have a concern about that just in and of itself, in terms of the notion that you appeal and 95% of the time you get an agreement, you don't get a decision from the court. I think we need to look substantively at that. And when an issue comes to the board where the other party wants to settle, we should have a conversation among the board about whether it's advisable to do that under these circumstances. Because often what we do is we just say, yeah, we settled it and this agreement has no precedential impact on anything. And at some point, if you're settling every case that gets appealed or almost all of them, when does the exception, consume the rule? When is it sort of reliable that if you appeal a case, you're going to get a settlement and you're not going to be in the same position that you would be where you lost at the first level? So what I'm saying is these are really important decisions that we need to think about, not just about the minutia of a case, but generally about the implementation and our administration of the law, and not short-circuiting that job by just settling everything.
So
that's a different question, Brooke, than what this motion puts forward. And so I think we're having multiple conversations here. But if we could go back to this motion, Alex, you have your hand up.
Well, just very briefly, that didn't necessarily answer my question. And just I apologize, maybe I need to frame it a bit better, but I want to understand what this motion actually is. And I think my question after listening to Brooke's response is the intent that we as a board would be all together actively involved in those negotiations, or would it just be that the ultimate privilege of voting up or down, it comes back to us? So per Brooke's model of usually it's one or two people that's delegated to negotiate, to evaluate, and then it's on them to bring it to the board and get the board to endorse. Is that the model that we're being asked to consider, or is it something whereas we all as a board are all then part of those negotiations?
No, I'm not suggesting that all 5 people, I mean, look, there's different contexts of negotiations. Okay, there's official or, formal mediation where you show up at a certain place on a certain day and you go, shuttle diplomat comes back and forth trying to bridge the gap and get people to make an agreement voluntarily. All right, that's one kind of negotiation. That's not typically what's happening here. What's happening here is the lawyer's talking to the other lawyer and they're, oh, you want this kind of language? Well, all we're suggesting is that Allison send the board an email and says, okay, this is what they're proposing. Let's talk about it in executive session. We do so in executive session after we've seen it initially, so we know what we're going to talk about. And we tell the lawyer, no, we don't agree with that. And no, we're not going to compromise on that. Okay, that's fine. And then the lawyer goes back and does their job. I mean, I've never engaged in as a lawyer, like having my client on the phone with the other side, unless we're in an actual mediation, Zoom or in person or whatever. So all I'm talking about is instead of Allison calling up Janet and saying, this is what the lawyer says, she communicates with the full board and we take it up at one of our 2 meetings each week and say, okay, this is what they said on Tuesday. It's Thursday. Get back to them today with this. That's logistically what I see happening. And we've given Allison the parameters, okay, there's this, that, and the other thing. And then there's the devil in the details. And the devil in the details work, the lawyer should be coming back to us and saying, this is the proposed language. I suggest responding like this, or, if you feel differently, I'll give you advice about that. And then, so the lawyer's still doing the lawyer's job. It's just that the lawyer's reporting to the board, not to one person.
The motion, just for clarification, says, I think all litigation matters. And I worry that at one level, we're studying how to make the appeals process more expeditious. And I'm worried that this could make it unwieldy. So I'll leave it at that. I'd like some more time to consider.
I think that is absolutely not an issue at all. We meet twice a week. It is not going to be a delay.
Yeah, so I think I understand the intent. I'm certainly happy to have us all, table this and finalize the conversation and the vote at a later meeting. I don't think that's a big deal, and everybody should have time to, think about it. But I really see this as just codifying what our current practice is and has been, right? I think we have been making collaborative decisions as a board on litigation matters. And I haven't seen Janet as the chair trying to take that authority into her own hands if the board was not comfortable with that. And so in our past, recent past, we've had deliberations about litigation, and we've instructed the legal team to go back and to the table with the opposing counsel or the judge or whatever, and present some sort of information or counteroffer or what have you. And there have been times when we said, yeah, there's going to be some details that need to be worked out. Let's assign one board member to be the one to work with legal staff to bring it across the finish line. And what I see this motion is doing is simply saying, before you cross the finish line, just come back to the board and show us what the final result was and make sure that the board is okay with that. Kind of feel like that's what we've been doing, except this might just formalize the finish line protocol a little bit more and force a few more of those settlement agreements, for example, to come back in front of us for one final vote before it's done. But I really do feel like we've been a collaborative board up until this point since we've reformed, and we've been doing that anyway. So I don't think this is a big deal. I think what Brooke is presenting is just codifying what our practice has been over the last few months. But again, very happy to, table and allow this to folks to cogitate some more before we vote on it.
Kirsten.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take more time. And have everyone, take the time they need to contemplate it, ask questions, discuss it. I would say, I don't think every settlement agreement that has occurred since the board was seated has come back to the board. So I guess that's just a little caveat in response to some of the current discussion. I think there have been settlement agreements signed that have not come back to the board, and that's my general interpretation of what this would do. I think that would be a good practice. And I also think, yeah, we do meet at least once, if not twice a week. So, and if there was some situation where there was something really time sensitive at the court that we needed to do some emergency meeting, like we could do that, but we meet frequently. So it's not the same as a municipal body that only meets once a month.
All right. So we are going to table this for a motion to act on a motion at some later date. Correct?
Can we discuss it next week? Like maybe we could, get it back on the agenda at the next agenda setting opportunity. That would
Yeah.
be my suggestion.
Sarah?
I would ask that our legal team have a chance to review this, particularly against our rules, because as I said, I'm concerned that the correct forum might be in our procedural rules and not necessarily as a standalone motion. And given the fact, I think as Alex spoke to it, we're already operating in this way. I'm not seeing an urgency to this. And so I'd rather wait and let our legal team look this over first and then get back to us as to when they think that they've had a chance to fully review and can respond to it.
And I think there haven't been multiple settlement agreements. Is that right, Allison? Hasn't there just been one?
There might have been two. I mean, basically the board gave the direction and then there was some finalization, I think, on maybe a second one within the scope of the direction given by the board.
So procedurally, how do we table, like, we have a motion on the floor, it was seconded, we've had discussion. So I'm trying to recreate my Robert's Rules of Order.
Well, we don't.
Do we need a
We
motion
don't
to
want to
table?
use Robert's rules, though.
Right, I know. So
So
what
we
does
need
everyone
to-
feel comfortable with in terms of
I-
formalizing this? I would feel comfortable tabling it to sort of a
Yeah.
date certain, saying not just in the future, but give it enough time so that Sarah's request can be honored and that we don't forget about it. So is that tabling it to our meeting on July 17th or perhaps July 21st?
Let's look at our agendas.
And Brooke, if you could send that to me, that'd be great. The language that you showed on the screen. And then, if there's any
Yeah, for sure.
clarification on that, that all litigation decisions, it sounds like I'm not sure if I don't know if we want to talk about this now, but whether that means like along the way, all decisions, motion filing, or if this is talking about settlement specifically, which is where most of the discussion is focused.
The decision point stuff, I guess, is what I'm referring to. Yeah. I mean, it's like you get asked about, can we have, extension of time? That's the lawyer's, right to decide that unless and you can say yes, unless you feel like it prejudices your client, not that kind of stuff, but the things you come to us for actual decision points. But that's what I'm talking about. We can wordsmith it better if you think it should be better identified. Sure.
I will note
Yeah,
we have
and I
had
think-
some go ahead. I was gonna say we
go
have
ahead,
had
Allison.
some eve of trial settlement things happening. So that would be, Kirsten mentioned an emergency meeting. I'm happy to write to advise you off the record, but I just wanted to flag factually, there have definitely been some kind of, and the judge, the judge acknowledged that often the pressure of trial can lead people to come to a mutually agreeable resolution on that timeline. So that's a situation where if we didn't have the flexibility that the statute provides, that there would need to be an emergency meeting. And Brooke also flagged mediation. That's another situation where you typically come with a client representative that has authority to make a decision. So we'd want to be thinking about that.
So on the 17th, we have discussion and possible action on draft regional planning commission application guidelines. We also have discussion on draft communications plan. And we have, those are the substantive items on the 17th. So I think there's room to add this on the 17th. Is that enough time, Allison, or would you anticipate needing more than a week to take a look at this? One of the things I was remembering is that we do have, we did inherit rules of procedure. We did inherit policy or procedures that give a lot of authority to the chair from the Natural Resources Board, and we haven't yet analyzed that and sort of picked it apart. And this is maybe one part of that. And I think I'd like to do this in a more systematic way and understand, the implications of changing things as a whole. Yeah, but there is time on the 17th, Allison.
Do we have this the next one's the 21st, I think?
Yeah.
Yes.
We
haven't really discussed that one yet at our regular agenda setting. So it's pretty open at the moment because we just haven't had a chance to talk about it yet.
And I would just note in terms of our procedural board rules, they predate the transfer over to the court model. So they are not applicable. They have nothing in
Right.
them.
Right.
That would impact this.
But I recall that
But-
there was it the delegation of authority thing that
Yes.
and we are operating differently from that particular document that I recall from the first month of our tenure, but I think in any case, Sarah.
One of the first things I think we did as a board was to confirm that we were operating under the same rules until amended. And so we
Right.
still are operating under those procedural rules, and we begin to operate differently, which is why we really need to take our time and look at the procedural rules in total before we stray too far. I worry about particularly if we were making some decisions legally outside of the rules or against the rules, that we're creating a liability for ourselves. So that's just one of those things that, yes, I believe we did adopt or agree to that there's continuation of the rules, even though we're in a different model. And so I think they all are applicable, and that's the sort of foundation of my concern.
Well, but I mean, whether we decide to continue to honor our rules or not, the rules are the rules. That's what's been enacted in 2005. Okay. And none of those rules have any bearing on this situation. So whether we continue to, it's about the Water Resources Board and the Land Use Panel and how they are quasi-judicial entities, how they hold hearings and all that. This has no relationship to then the board being transformed into the Natural Resources Board from the Environmental Board. And, you know,
Right.
they didn't even change the names that are in there. These
Right.
panels don't exist anymore.
Right.
And so they are really inapplicable. So to me, this is a statute that is the paramount, except for our constitution in Vermont. We would be following the statutory language that says it's the chair or as the board directs otherwise. We are merely exercising our statutory authority to vote on something that is altering permissibly who the representative at the court is. So to me, there is no other non-superior law that would be implicated. Whatever we would decide pursuant to our statutory authority, that's what becomes our operating North Star. Whether or not that ultimately gets put into some rules or guidance documents, well, that's kind of superfluous because the board by motion has made a decision. So that's my theory of going forward on the matter.
Alex,
It sounds like Allison would like July 21st to give a little bit more time to take a look and check against rules of procedure. Is that right, Allison?
That would be great. Thank you.
So that's my proposal. Why don't we take this up again on July 21st?
That's fine with me.
okay. So we do have a proposed executive session and a particular couple of cases to discuss. Annette, you have some comment?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to weigh in on your discussion just now. I'm going to point to, I think what Alex said at the very first meeting was that we are a board and we're operating as a board. And that is, I think, a very healthy attitude. The other thing that I will share with you from before, when it was the Natural Resources Board, is I never understood what the role of the NRB was in court cases. And so this is an issue that I see as really important for you all to get ahead of and figure out how you are going to operate in these court cases, because what happened under the Natural Resources Board was not anything that made any sense. And I think if you talk to lawyers, you would probably hear something similar. But I never understood what the role was. And I would hope that you as a board will come together to figure this out sooner rather than later, and that you make it clear to everyone what your role is. And I don't know the details of what's gone on with some of the things that you're discussing, but I'll tell you that one of the issues that has been a real sticking point for a lot of people for years is that the chair of the NRB was entering into settlement agreements that were actually undercutting the rights of parties. And this has to stop. And so these settlement agreements that are done behind closed doors that are not, maybe that's not happening now, but whatever, there has been a lot of concern about it. I'll give you one case in particular that I was aware of. We helped some people participate in the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail case, where it involved people's homes that were right next to the rail trail, and there was a lot of littering. There was a lot of air pollution with the diesel exhaust. And then a deal got cut, and the parties were completely left out of it. They didn't even know it happened. And so that's just one example. I'm sure there are many others, but I would encourage you to not put this off and to assure that you all are comfortable with the way that your board is interacting with the court system to whatever extent is necessary or not, but that the settlement agreements are done in a way that has the full knowledge and understanding of all of the board members, so that you make sure that it's not viewed in any way by the public as cutting special deals. So that's my input on it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Sarah?
So I apologize. It took me a little bit to find it. I would have been more prepared if I had known the intricacies of the motion today, but we were all given earlier, it may have been January, early February. It's a document entitled Vermont Natural Resources Board Delegation of Authority to the Board Chair effective November 13th, 2018. I believe that we as a LURB readopted this. And it also gives in about participation in appeals and other litigation subject to board policy direction on basic positions. So just wanting to make sure that what we've done and what we've agreed to and what we've adopted, we don't run afoul of. And just, I think that's one document just to make sure that we look at.
You share that with us, Sarah?
I have it in paper form. I think we all received it somewhere. I'll do a digital search. Worst comes to worst, I'll throw it on a scanner.
I was trying to find it earlier, but I couldn't, via email or something. And maybe, were we given a paper copy? And not a digital copy?
No, I'm just not
Do you
a
know where
digital
that
native and I
sits,
print
Allison
things.
or Pete, in
I
our
can-
share?
I can locate that for you.
Okay. Thank you. So we were about to consider moving into executive session. Kirsten,
Oh, I was just gonna offer to make a motion to go into an executive session if our
Oh, okay.
conversation is concluded on that. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and to have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters. I move that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage and that the board enter executive session.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Hi.
Okey doke. So the board will go into executive session and return to this meeting at the conclusion of executive session. Sorry, I went right back into the executive session. Let's see. Do we have everybody? It looks like it. Yes. Okay. We're back and we are recording.
All right. I have two motions to offer as a result of our discussions during our executive session. The first motion is to authorize enforcement to finalize the proposed citation and transmit it to the respondent in enforcement case 2025_006. Happy to take a second.
Right.
I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
That was 5 ayes. That is unanimous on that motion. Thank you.
And my second motion is to move to authorize enforcement to pursue a second AOD against the respondents in enforcement case 2024_147.
I'll second.
Second. Oh. Sarah.
Okay, seconded by Sarah. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
It's 5 votes in the affirmative, so that motion also passes. And we have nothing left on the agenda but to adjourn. Sarah,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
thank you.
I'll second.
Second.
Kirsten got it. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
And that is unanimous. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.